In this little vignette, we're going to talk about a series of analysis methods. So I took all the highfalutin words out earlier, right? We're not going to be BI and analytics and all that. We're going to do data analysis. That's what they all really mean. You're doing data analysis. And there's a bunch of different methods. My favorite book on this is not a textbook. It's a book that you can buy used on the web if you really want to. You don't need to for this, but it's a book called The Universal Traveler. My brother-in-law gave it to me because he said, this sounds like what you do. And, he was right. So remember, our definition of analysis is the separation of an intellectual or substantive whole into its constituent parts. There are two basic analysis methods. One, you ask questions. So you're looking around and just being curious, trying to find out what's actually happening. The other, however, is comparing. And this is something that is quite important because as an undergraduate, you probably haven't seen very much, but by the time you get to graduate school, you've seen some stuff. Maybe switch companies. I know how they did it here, or I know how they did it in this particular instance in here. These are the two basic methods, and everything else we're going to look at are variations of these two methods. But what we're going to do is take a look at some very specific rule of thumb kinds of things. So the 16 techniques we have are called the basic questions, the pack rat. I'm not going to read them all here for you, but you can see them up there. And I'm just going to take you very briefly through them because each of these can be useful when you're trying to do things. Now notice, this is not step 1, step 2, step 3, memorize and learn. This is how do you generally approach the problem? So basic questions. Who can help me? What's been already tried? Google is always your friend out there. Are there books or references that are available? What are my resources? What's required in this? Where can the information be found? What's the primary scope? What are the limits? What can I control? What can't I control? And what is allowed and what is not allowed? Sounds pretty simple, right? Pack rat. Love this particular one. When you're stuck on a particular aspect of a problem, for 30 minutes, go somewhere. New room, in the library, unfamiliar laboratory, somewhere that's different, and bring back something to your project nest and make it a game. So the analysis of a pack rat is kind of handled in a random, haphazard fashion, which you wouldn't want to do for the entire set of analysis, but to deliberately pursue it for some aspects of your problem is super, super useful because you'll walk into your pack rat room and see something that you left there 2 days ago and go, I've got a connection now between this thing and that thing over here. Cynetics, forced relationships. Cynetics asks the question, how is this thing like that thing? Forced relationships ask the question, what would result if I combined or joined this thing to that thing? So let's take a couple of examples. Analyze a fireplace. How is a fireplace like a breakfast cereal? I don't know. I've never thought of these things before, right? Well, both are involved in fuel consumption. Maybe there is a relationship there that we're not sure about before. What would happen if you joined a fireplace to a table? Well, a stovetop of Pyrex on which you could both cook and eat would be kind of really nice, treating the heat through the glass hood. Here's one of my favorite examples of forced integration. This is a barbie, as they say in South Africa, a barbecue, and it's attached to somebody's motorcycle. So clearly a pretty good thing. I just hope they don't use LP gas to power that thing because involved in a crash might not work so good. Back to the sun, fourth topic. You could trace things by tracing their history back to their natural sources, and ultimately the sun is the source of everything. So shoes can be leather, rubber, string, nails, grommets, polish, and thread. Houses can be collections of glass, nails, and wood, or assemblies of rooms, hallways, and stairs. We'll look at an example of that a little bit later on. Here's an interesting twist on technology here. A little bit dense in terms of the reading here, but basically the railroad started off, when we built the railroad tracks, 4 feet, 8.5 inches across. Why is that? Now, that's the way they built them in England, and English people built our railroads. Okay, why did the English build them like that? Well, because the first railway lines were built by the same people who built the pre-railway tram lines. That's used to take a horse and draw a wagon across it. And if you had a road that was smooth, it was easier to bring the goods and services. Why did they use that gauge? Well, the people who built the trams used the same tools that they use for building wagons, which use the same wheel spacing. Oh, okay. Why did the wagons have that wheel spacing? Well, they tried to use other wheel spacing, but the wagon wheels would break because the long-distance roads in England were the same spacing, 4 feet, 8.5 inches. So who built all those old rutted roads? Well, turns out that was the Romans. way back in the old days. The chariots were that big and they wore the roads down and the roads were still there thousands of years later. Okay, great. So now we've got the answer to the original question. Standard railroad gauge was done because the specifications and the bureaucracies live forever, and we already had the infrastructure that was done in there. So next time you're handed a specification and you're wondering where did this come from, it came from a horse's rear. Technically, 2 horses' rears, because that was the width of those particular tracks. Now, there's another twist to the story on this, which you guys all know what a solid rocket booster is. When they were building those boosters, they built them in Utah, but they needed to light them off in Florida. And in order to get from Utah to Florida, they had to fit on a railroad track and fit through a tunnel. So, once again, the size of the space shuttle boosters were also determined by the width of the horse's rear. By the way, if you go to Snopes, they say that entire story is false, but it does show a nice twist on the whole thing. Here's another analysis technique, attribute listing. What you're doing here is just writing down stuff about things. So, for example, if I'm looking at physical characteristics, I might get the color, the weight, the mass, the speed, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm getting psychological, I might look for appearance or perceptual stimuli that are around there. If I'm social, I might be looking for norms, taboos, other types of things. Writing down these attributes can give you an awful lot of listing. Here's one that's even broader than that. Put down all that you know. Now, if I were to give you a pad and a pencil and say to you, either alone or with a friend, write down all you know about the existing problem, you kind of go, oh, I need to force this stuff out of me to actually get it written down. So, for example, if I said, write down all the wine labels that you know, you might write down a bunch of them. But if I showed you a list of 50, you'd probably recognize most of them. So the key here is that by putting stuff down in documentation, you can actually start to come up with some much better analytic techniques. What have others done? All right, well, a critical examination to the solutions that others have implemented. There's nothing wrong with going out there on the web and finding out who's done what. So make a list of all the previous solutions, why they worked or didn't work to solve that particular problem. Analysis models. I love this particular picture. It's a Vanity Fair cover that was on recently showing that Oprah actually has 3 hands. We've always wondered why Oprah was so talented. This probably answers that particular example. Physical models, charts, graphs, patterns, assemblies. You get the picture here. Morphological. Study of form and structure of problems to find out their specific structural features. And the idea here is we're organizing the attributes to deal with them as ways of doing interrelated relationships. So, for example, all the problem attributes that we might put down, we might separate the list into components or categories, and systematically determining comparisons or trying to pair one thing and finding out how that pairs with something else. Matrices are an important analysis technique that can help clarify the relationship. If you're a consultant, you have to have at least a couple 4-quadrant matrices that you use in there to solve a problem. Matrices are very good ways of describing analytical techniques. Here's a CRUD matrix. This is diving a little bit into data here, but just so that you see it. If I'm trying to figure out what the relationship between business processes and data items are, I can have this information documented and look and say that data item A is created by business process 2, which means if business process 3 wants to read data item A, business process 2 has to occur before business process 3 occurs. Look for patterns in things too. This gets us into the data mining piece. Again, small situations that are trying to get us towards a larger solution by searching for the patterns that are in there. Again, the data mining thing we talked about, one of the other lectures might be useful on that. I don't know if you've seen any hidden pictures, but you might want to stop the video right here and stare at the screen for a little bit. There is actually a hidden picture here. If you look at it, it's a sort of rising set of stairs that goes from the left to the right on your screen. The only way you're actually going to see this is if you hold it up in front of you, about 6 inches in front of your face, and then try to focus your eyes exactly 12 inches beyond where it is. And yes, there it goes for me. Some people never see these things. They think we're all crazy, the rest of us. If you have trouble seeing this, print this one slide out, put it up on your cubicle wall or next to your bed or something, and one day I guarantee you will be looking at something else and you'll see the pattern that's in here. The harder you try to look at it, of course, the worse you're going to actually see it. All right, next technique, the expert consultant. Yes, somebody from out of town with a watch. right? Call in an expert to double check this. Star Trek's holodeck is a wonderful example there. Most of you have seen that particular piece. And there's a little video here about the expert that I'm going to show you. It's very, very quick and clever, but it shows that most people, when they're talking, particularly experts, have trouble communicating in here.
Our company has a new strategic initiative to increase market penetration, maximize brand loyalty, and enhance intangible assets. In pursuit of these objectives, we've started a new project for which we require 7 red lines. I understand your company can help us in this matter.
Of course. Walter here will be the project manager. Walter, we can do this, can't we?
Yes, of course. Anderson here is our expert in all matters related to the drawing of red lines. We've brought him along today to share his professional opinion.
Nice to meet you. Well, you all know me. This is Justine, our company's design specialist.
Hello.
We need you to draw 7 red lines, all of them strictly perpendicular, some with green ink and some with transparent. Can you do that?
No, I'm afraid
Let's not rush into any hasty answers, Anderson. The task has been set and needs to be carried out. At the end of the day, you are an expert.
The term red line implies the color of the line to be red. To draw a red line with green ink is, well, if it's not exactly impossible, it's pretty close to being impossible.
What does that even mean? Impossible.
I mean, it is possible. There are some people, say, suffering from color blindness, for whom the color of the lines doesn't really make a difference. But I'm quite sure that the target audience of your project doesn't consist solely of such people.
So in principle, this is possible.
I'll simplify. A line as such can be drawn with absolutely any ink, but if you want to get a red line, you need to use red ink.
What if we draw them with blue ink?
It still won't work. If you use blue ink, you'll get blue lines. And what exactly did you mean when you talked about the transparent ink?
How to better explain? I'm sure you know what transparent means.
Yes, I do.
And what a red line means. I hope I don't need to explain to you.
Of course not.
Well, you need to draw a red line with transparent ink.
Could you describe what you imagine the end result would look like?
Oh, come on, Anderson. What have we got here? Kindergarten?
No, I'm just trying to get a...
Let's not waste our time with these unproductive quarrels. The task has been set, the task is plain and clear. Now, if you have any specific questions, then go ahead.
You're the expert here.
All right, let's leave aside the color for the moment. You had something there also relating to perpendicularity.
7 lines, all strictly perpendicular.
To what?
To everything amongst themselves. I assumed you know what perpendicular lines are like.
Of course he does. He's an expert.
2 lines can be perpendicular. All 7 can't be simultaneously perpendicular to each other. I'll show you. This is a line, right?
Yes.
And another, is it perpendicular to the first line?
Well,
Yes, it is perpendicular.
exactly.
Wait, I'm not done. And a third one, is it perpendicular to the first line? Yes, it is. But it doesn't cross the second line. They're both parallel, not perpendicular.
Suppose so.
There it is. 2 lines can be perpendicular.
Can I have the pen? How about this?
This is a triangle. It's definitely not perpendicular lines. And there are 3, not 7.
Why are they blue?
Indeed, I wanted to ask that myself.
I have a blue pen with me. This was just a demonstration.
That's the problem. Your lines are blue. Draw them with red ink.
It won't solve the problem.
But how do you know before you've tried? Let's draw them with red ink, then let's see.
I don't have a red pen with me, but I'm completely certain that with red ink, the result will still be the same.
Didn't you tell us earlier that you could only draw red lines with red ink? In fact, yes, I've written that down here. And now you want to draw them with blue ink. Do you want us to call these red lines?
I think I understand. You're not talking about the color now, right? You're talking about that what do you call it?
Perpendicularity, yes!
That's it. Now you've confused everyone. So what exactly is stopping us from doing this?
Geometry.
Just ignore it.
We have a task. 7 red lines. It's not 20, it's just 7. Anderson, I understand you're a specialist of a narrow field. You don't see the overall picture. But surely it's not a difficult task to draw some 7 lines.
Exactly. Suggest a solution. Now, any fool can criticize. No offense. But you're an expert. You should know better.
Okay. Let me draw you 2 perfectly perpendicular red lines, and I will draw the rest with transparent ink. They'll be invisible, but I'll draw them.
Would this suit us? Yes, this will suit us. Yes, but at least a couple with green ink. Oh, and I have another question, if I may. Can you draw one of the lines in the form of a kitten?
What?
In the form of a kitten? Market research tells us our users like cute animals. It would be really great if we could...
No.
But why?
Look, I can of course draw you a cat. I'm no artist, but I can give it a try, but it won't be a line anymore, it'll be a cat. A line and a cat, these are 2 different things.
A kitten. Not a cat, but a kitten. They're little, cute, cuddly. Cats, on the other hand,
It won't make a difference.
Anderson, at least hear her out. She hasn't even finished speaking and you're already saying no.
I got the idea, but it's impossible to draw a line in the form of a cat. Done.
What about a bird?
So, where do we stop? What are we doing?
7 red lines, 2 with red ink, 2 with green ink, and the rest with transparent. Did I understand correctly?
Yes.
Excellent. In which case, that's everything, right?
Oh, I almost forgot. We also have a red balloon. Do you know if you could inflate it?
What do I have to do with balloons?
It's red.
Anderson, can you or can you not do this? A simple question.
As such, I can, of course, but...
Excellent. Organise a business trip. We'll cover the expenses, go over to their location, inflate the balloon. Well, this is very productive. Thank you all.
Can I ask you one more question, please? When you inflate the balloon, could you do it in the form of a kitten?
Of course I can. I can do anything. I can do absolutely anything. I'm an expert.
Number 13, expanding objectives. The analysis state can be broadened by making it more meaningful. Expanding the objectives, trying to clarify those particular piece. This particular one stars something called the scope creep. So the pointy-haired boss in Dilbert has hired a scope creep to help determine our product features, and he says, you need more features. The boss says, good work. When can you have it done? Of course, Dilbert says, oh my gosh, you can't keep adding things to a project that's already over budget, behind schedule, and not delivering what we're trying to deliver. The idea dump. Search for mental pockets of ideas. Share ideas, looking for critiques. Have you ever done a critical design review? That means you go in there and the purpose is to break something as opposed to trying to actually make it work. How does that look? It looks fine to me, right? Well, if you pay them to break it, they will actually break it. Save all those useful ideas and come back to define the problem later on. Sensitivity game. Maybe physical touch is important to this. So you want to examine it with your fingers, feel its surface, touch the temperature, all kinds of things that are out there. Finally, the last technique, squeeze and stretch. We'll do stretch first. Stretch the problem to discover what its parts are by asking a series of questions that begin with what. So, for example, what is this problem about? Judo. Judo. What's judo all about? Well, judo is all about physical efficiency. And what is your physical efficiency all about? Well, finding the optimal use of your body movements. Or squeeze. This is the other direction. Squeeze brings it down to its essentials. Ask a chain of questions beginning with why. All right, why am I doing this? Because I want to. Why do I want to? Because it makes me happy. Why will it make you happy? Well, and it goes on from there. So these are a series of techniques that you can use. Something else that's really important here is to figure out your perspective on the problem. And for that, we're going to use a little technique called the Zachman framework. And what John Zachman did is he discovered that there were a series of predefined areas that fall in for most organizations. There's an executive perspective. There is a business perspective. There is an architect perspective, an engineering perspective, and a technical perspective. And each of those perspectives requires different amounts of detail. For example, the easiest one to figure out on all this is the executives can basically only keep track of lists. And if you work with executives enough, you'll figure out pretty soon, one of their first questions is this something I need to pay attention to or not? Because I can only pay attention to so many things. So here's the Zachman framework. This is not to learn this, but it'll help you to scope the problem. So when you're looking and having a conversation with somebody and solving a particular aspect of the problem, it's often very useful to say, are we talking about this from the architect's perspective or the engineer's perspective? And frankly, for what we're doing in this class, it's really more, are we talking executives or are we talking details? And that will help you do this. Notice also the framework is also broken up into columns dealing with the 6 interrogatives: who, what, where, when, how, and why. If we look again at the executive perspective, zooming in the upper left-hand corner there, you can see the lists that are there for the what and how columns. But once we get down to the business management perspective, somebody actually has to deal with it, we're now concerned with how those lists are related to each other. And the process definition, it's talking about sequence. Each of these things allows you to take a look all the way at different perspectives. Again, this is not memorize the Zachman framework, for goodness sake. It's simply an organizing perspective that will allow you to help figure out what's important right now about your problem. So I'm showing you each of the various columns and things, just jumping around the whole thing so that you can see what that column or row ends up looking like. Because we do need to have what we call the Zachman framework conversation eventually. Yeah, I'd like to build a building. Okay, what kind of a building? Do you want to eat it? Do you want to work in it? Do you want to sleep in it? Oh, yeah, I'd like to sleep in it. Okay, the architect says, moron, why didn't you tell me you wanted to build a house in the first place? Oh, yeah, that's right, I want a house. Okay, cool. And how large a house do you have in mind? Well, my lot size is 100 by 300 feet, so I'd like my house to be about 50 feet by 100 feet. Of course, that doesn't apply to McMansions, which would also be 100 by 300 feet, but we won't get into that. Okay, yeah, that's about right. And how many bedrooms do you need? Well, I've got 2 kids, so I'd like 3 bedrooms. Again, very, very reasonable conversations. Now, the last thing we're doing in this little section is talk about the process of problem solving, which we're going to follow in here. It starts out over here with understanding the situation. If we understand the situation, then we move on to analyzing it. That analysis will allow us to further define what the problem is, where we can start then ideating. I hate that word, but it's used all the time. It means thinking, okay? And then we'll select some of the things that we've thought about for implementation. And when we implement them, we will evaluate them. And if that didn't solve the problem, go back to the beginning and start over. Plan on repeating this cycle a lot as we're going through this particular process.